It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode is brought to you by HP. Whenever you do your best thinking, the HP Spectre X360 is ready when inspiration strikes. With power save for battery life and focus mode to multitask, you can do your best thinking whenever and wherever it happens. The HP Spectre X360 2-in-1 convertible PC with Windows 10 saves battery life for whenever an idea hits you. HP Spectre X360, a more thoughtful laptop.
You're Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome to the Locked On Flyers podcast for Wednesday, August 11th, your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high-quality content that is excited to get into some nitty-gritty of analytics with Chris Watkins on today's show. Follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Flyers. You can keep up to date on all the Flyers news, Phantoms news, our episodes, all that good stuff. You can also email the show at lockedonflyers@gmail.com. I'm your host, Rachel Donner. You can find me on Twitter at rmiriam. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. Today, we're going to talk about the Carter Hart contract and then get into our analytics discussion with Chris Watkins. Locked On Flyers is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Odyssey, or wherever you are listening right now. Hit that subscribe button and you'll get all of the Locked On Flyers episodes here on the Locked On Sports Network. So the big news of the week thus far is that Carter Hart's contract was finalized, and it was one of two remaining significant RFA contracts, the other, of course, being Travis Sanheim. The Flyers signed Carter Hart to an $11.937 million contract with a $3.979 million AAV attached to it. What this does for the Flyers is lock in Carter Hart for the next 3 years, and he'll have 1 year left of RFA status at the end of it, with a required qualifying offer due then in 2024 of $4.479 million. So I think that this contract is a pretty good one for Carter Hart and a decent one for the Flyers. I think when we had talked about potential rates and term for this Carter Hart contract, I had surmised that it might be a 2-year deal worth $3.5 million AAV, and so this was a little higher. So it looks like Carter Hart and his team negotiated a little bit of a higher salary than one might have expected given his performance this past year. But I think getting it for 3 years is good for him because it guarantees him that money for that extra year. And I think it puts the team in a good place with a specific qualifying offer due so they know exactly what that's going to be. Carter Hart held a press conference with the team after the deal was made official, and he talked about his summer, his off-season training. He's been playing golf and tennis. They were asking him about the changes to the roster, and he said he was really looking forward to it, looking forward to getting started. Some people asked him specific questions about his practices over the summer and what he's working on. He was kind of cagey about it, and rightfully so, because obviously he doesn't want to put out there what his specific flaws are, but we kind of know what they are, with the glove hand side being the most significant issue on those high shots, but that he's working on issues specifically. He is working on his puck handling specifically as well, and so I think that he knows what he needs to work on. He's been working with Kim Dillabaugh and trying to improve his game in this offseason. And I think overall, this seems to be a fairly decent contract for both sides. So hopefully it works out for him and it works out for the team, and that he and Martin Jones have a successful upcoming season as the goalie tandem for the Flyers. All right. So, like I said at the top of the show, I am so thrilled to welcome one of my favorite analytics experts on hockey Twitter, Chris Watkins, to the show. Welcome, Chris.
Oh, thanks very much. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Definitely super excited to talk about the Flyers and all the fun things they've done recently. And no, it's just good to chat. How are you doing?
Pretty good. I think that, the Flyers have made some interesting moves that time will tell how they play out, but they certainly checked off some boxes on their list.
Yes, exactly. If they were the right boxes, we'll see. But yeah, no, definitely at least made the offseason a lot more interesting than it's been in past years.
Absolutely. Well, you are one of my favorite follows on Twitter, partially because you have a really definite approach to hockey analytics and you are not afraid to express your opinion. And I love both of those things. But what is your overall analytical approach to evaluating talent or player valuation in hockey?
Yeah, I try to take a little bit of a different approach, than the sort of normal analytics spin. A lot of people have come up with one number metrics to evaluate and assess the quality of players, and then a lot more like advanced stuff past that, like to plug, one of my partner sites, Hockey Graphs. There's a really great article that came out this week about like valuing the different plays of a possession and all that stuff. So go check it out if you get a chance. But I look at it a little bit differently. When I'm relatively new to the sport of hockey. I grew up playing basketball and football and a bunch of other sports. And so what I was more curious as it was like, why is someone like, having a really great season or a really bad season compared to how they used to do? Or why someone has like a 5 WAR versus a 4. Like oftentimes I don't even know the context of those. Like, is 4 good? Is 4 bad? Like, I don't know. So to me, what's more important is to figure out why that person is doing it. Because that also can help explain like, well, are they playing on the right team or in the right situation or context and all of that. So it's really interesting to be able to contrast my numbers versus other people's metrics and see where the differences are. Because then that allows me to sort of like, pick and choose like, okay, what I will agree with and not agree with. And oftentimes there's a lot of disagreement.
So talking about your approach, do you have a preferred set of stats that you use in your model or a particular model that's already out there that you prefer when you're trying to compare players or contract values?
Yeah. So the good part is I try for most of this sort of the big public analytic models, I usually have one of my own. So that's the first place I start, especially when it comes to things like contracts and things of that nature. So I'll look there first. And then, but what I use as a calibrator, so for a lot of my models, I use Evolving Hockey's RAPM model as basically like I'm trying to predict that number with my models. I found it to be pretty good in terms of passing the eye test, like, okay, Connor McDavid's at the top of it, and someone like Rasmus Ristolainen is at the bottom. Then I'm like, okay, that's a pretty good starting point. And then I have some other ways to test it to make sure that the numbers don't jump too much or up or down over the years, and then I set my numbers against that. So I look at that. I look at Micah's stuff sometimes. Jay Fresh has created a lot of metrics recently. National Stat Trick has a lot of good metrics. So I use that. But to me, when I really want to do something really quick, is Corsi 4 and expected goals 4, and I'll start there. And if I feel something doesn't make sense, I'll dive deeper from there.
Yeah, those are all really good resources, and we use them on a pretty regular basis as well. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry? You have access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket instead. Save tons of time and money by using rockauto.com. They're a family business. They've been serving auto parts customers online for 20 years, so I know I can trust them. Go to rockauto.com to shop for auto and body parts from hundreds of manufacturers. They have everything from engine control modules and brake parts to tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. You can get everything you need in a few easy clicks delivered directly to your door. Best of all, prices at rockauto.com are always reliably low, and the same for professionals and do-it-yourselfers. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so that they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com.
David Harrison here, the Locked On Washington Football Team podcast, celebrating with you a 21 grain salute to a less boring sandwich thanks to Dave's Killer Bread. I don't know about you guys, but when I eat pizza, I eat it for the toppings, not the crust. And when I eat a sandwich, it's for what's inside the bread, not for the bread. But when I throw a sandwich on 21 whole grains and seeds, thin sliced bread from Dave's Killer Bread, it is the epitome of addition by subtraction. That thin sliced bread lets me focus on what's inside the sandwich, but also adds to the sandwich with killer taste, killer texture, killer nutrition, a subtle sweetness, and a seed-coated crust. Dave's Killer Bread is America's #1 organic bread for a reason. It tastes so stinking good. Dave's Killer Bread is made with the highest quality organic and non-GMO ingredients and is power-packed with whole grains, fiber, and protein. Visit daveskillerbread.com to learn more and look for Dave's Killer Bread in the bread aisle of your local grocery store.
One of the big questions I think that's out there, especially when we were having the debate over Rasmus Ristolainen in Flyers land, how much do you weigh overall team performance and looking at the stats on a particular skater?
So for me, I actually do take a lot into account given the team performance. So in the research I've done and the data I've seen, when it comes to defensemen particularly, the context matters a lot. So who are they paired with? What situations are they being put in? What is the system that they're playing in? Things like that. There's a lot of stuff outside of defenseman's control. And so you actually do need to look at the team context to understand, like, okay, this may be a good defenseman in theory, but, they scored, we won't name any names, but the defenseman scored 15 goals last year or whatever. Like, is that a good defenseman? I'm like, well, it depends on how they were used. They scored 15 goals, but they shot like 10 times a game or whatever. And the shooting percentage is like 3%. So they're taking like shots away from like better players, then like that's bad. But if they are consistently hitting 15 goals and they're shooting like 10%, then that's actually probably a good idea. So like that context matters. Like, is it because they're playing on the power play, or is their coach having them used very aggressively or playing 25 minutes a night? So all those things matter, especially much more for defensemen. But I think even in the context of like, is this team good or not? I think that matters. And a lot of the WAR metrics, a lot of the RAPM metrics, when a team is bad, they have to sort of punish everybody because there has to be a reason why the team is bad. And so even this good player on a bad team, he must be doing something to make the team bad or contribute to it being bad overall. So it sort of credits that. And my data plus eye test, is a little bit more skeptical of that approach.
Yeah, you're talking a lot about defensemen there. And I feel like it's much easier to evaluate defensemen's offensive skills. Right. How do you approach their defensive skills?
It's a good question. I don't think anybody has a great answer, even from the stuff I've seen on a more like private level. I think it's still a work in progress. So for me, as I said, my background is primarily coming from like the NBA in particular, which had a lot of the tracking data that the NHL is trying to implement now, that has a lot of the sort of concepts that that NHL teams are trying to replicate in terms of analytics. And even there, they say, like, how do you know that, if a person scores, who's responsible for it? Was it the person that got beat off the dribble and the person and the player blew past them? Or was it the guy at the rim that was supposed to protect it? And so it's the same thing with hockey, where it's like, okay, was it the player's fault for giving up a shot? Or was it the goalie's fault for not getting over? Or was it the forward's fault for turning the puck and creating like a 2-on-1 to begin with? Like, allocating the different, blame and credit for that stuff is still very difficult. For me, I look at a couple of stats because there's so many different factors. With all the factors taken into account, it's like, all right, if this person comes on and they give up like 20, like 10 shots more than the average defenseman on their team, they're probably pretty bad. There may be something to explain it, but at that point, you probably could estimate that they're pretty bad. And then I look at my metrics that also track, like, do they prevent like zone entries, or do they, get the puck out, which is actually a thing that's underrated a lot of times. And it's really, going back to your boy Rasmus, it's really his biggest downfall is not even stopping the puck. It's getting the puck out once he stops it. That he just has not been able to do that consistently. And so it just creates a cycle of getting buried in his own zone. And so in that situation, it's like, is he a bad defender? No, but you have to pair him with the right partner to cover up his weaknesses to sort of allow it to work.
My general thoughts on it are the NHL needs better tracking in terms of what happens to get the puck out of the defensive zone, and then what's the immediate play after that.
Right.
In terms of what pass or what shot takes place. Does somebody skate it? Does somebody create another pass?
Right.
What is that next step? And I don't think the NHL has the right data yet.
Right.
Overall to be able to properly analyze some of that. But I'm hoping what they're working on right now will help move that forward. And you were talking about, other sports. Do you think there's any methodology or stat from another sport that you've observed that would be useful for hockey to adapt?
I think they're getting there. So there's a couple of different stats that you see. So the NBA, for example, has play type tracking. So, for example, if LeBron is coming down and he runs a pick and roll, you can go on NBA.com the next day and select all of the pick and rolls that LeBron has run in the past 3 years. And you can see them. And then in that particular situation, LeBron is in the 95th percentile in terms of scoring in that situation versus somebody else. And so I think that to me is like one of the more critical pieces, because, you just break it down to like zone entries, and like a zone entry from the right, Mitch Marner is in the 94th percentile, but I'm trying to think who's a bad forward. Philip Deneau is in the 45th percentile, so maybe you don't have him do that. So I think that to me is probably part one of just sort of classifying play types. I think another one is sort of power play formation. So in football, they have different defenses: the 3-4, the 4-3, the nickel, where you have 5 defensive backs, and the quarterback's performance against that. What I would love to see is how a particular power play goes against a particular penalty kill. So if they're doing the 1-3-1, does a diamond work best against that, or an umbrella, or something of that nature? So I think those will help. And then overall, to plug myself, just to have a better understanding of why stats are the way they are. So I think in hockey, we still resort to this player's 3 WAR and this player's 2 WAR, and that one's much better. And I think whenever I watch a basketball game, they have the context to know, like, yes, LeBron didn't lead the league in WAR, but because of the way he plays and what he brings to the table as a passer and as a shooter, and the way he can change his game given the circumstance, WAR is not all that representative of how good of a player he is. You do need that additional context, and saying like he's a great shooter plus a great post-up player, and that combination is very difficult to stop. And I don't think we have the same context in hockey.
Yeah, that's a real interesting way of looking at it. And something you said about the NHL needing to classify play types a little bit better. There's one particular play that the Flyers did a lot last year that drove me insane. And that was a slingshot play, or like a back pass to try and move the puck forward. And it almost never worked. And they did it again and again and again. And if we had hard data on that to show that it doesn't work, maybe they would stop.
Right. Yeah, no, that's my boy Prashant Ayers. He's hated the drop pass on like the penalty kill breakout for probably breakout for years. He's like, it never works. It's like a 95% chance of not working. Some people have done a lot of good projects. So a really good example, a few years ago, Ryan Stimson did a passing project, basically to classify the different types of passes in a given game. And he showed that a pass from low to high, so basically from behind the net to the blue line, created much more offense than a sort of pass in reverse on the power play. So like things like that, where the question I always have is like, okay, this team or this player has a 56%, or this team has a 46% Corsi for it. Yeah, that's bad. So how do they fix it? Like, what is your suggestion to fix it? And the answer is generally like get better players. Like, how do you identify who those players are? How do you identify who would fit into the system and sort of how it makes it work? So it's like, what are you supposed to do with that information that it makes it useful? So having something like saying, oh, a high-low pass or low-high pass works and gets you double the offense, do that more is much more helpful to me as a fan and as a coach than just saying your team sucks, like get better, or your team is really good, keep doing it. Like, what am I doing that's sustainable to make it work? So
I've been talking about Built Bars on this show for so long now, and they become such a staple of my diet. Built Bars are a soft protein bar, but they taste just like a candy bar, and somehow they have so many amazing flavors to choose from. They have something for everyone, no matter what your tastes are. Some of my personal favorites they have are raspberry, cherry barcia, salted caramel, mint brownie, cookies and cream, and German chocolate. The best part is that they're healthy. Built Bars are great if you're looking to lose or maintain weight while indulging in that delicious treat. I don't know how they do it, but they're an amazing combination of being low calorie, low sugar, high protein, and high fiber. And they're great if you're on the keto diet or some other special diet plan. So go to BuiltBar.com and use the promo code LOCKED15 and you'll get 15% off your next order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. The NHL is in the off-season, but there's still time to decide what sports bets you're thinking of making all summer long. And the perfect place to go for that is to our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your sports action. You've got baseball, golf, MMA, UFC, so many other sports are happening right now. So before that next pitch or tee-off, head over to BetOnline to check out all the latest sporting news, sign-up bonuses, and contest information. You can get real-time, updated odds and props on almost anything you can imagine. BetOnline has you covered for all the news, scores, and odds. It's the best way to place your bets, and it's free to sign up. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. Along those lines, for the Flyers, we had all these needs going into this offseason. Just from a purely analytical standpoint, what do you think was the best or worst move the Flyers made?
I mean, I think the Carter Hart extension that just came through, I think is a fair bet on both sides in terms of what they're trying to accomplish. I think, yes, Carter Hart had a bad year last year, but often say that's often in the team's best interest sometimes, especially if it's a player that has a track record of success and then has a bad year right when they're up for contracts. You can really get a really good bargain for it because they're at a reduced ability to sort of negotiate in that situation. Versus Carter Hart, was like third for Vezina and, put up a 937 or something like that. Then you're talking about $7-8 million a year or whatever. And it's like, ooh, do I really want to pay that? So being able to lock him in, get more of a sample size of sort of the player that he's going to be, and understanding that, I think is a big win for them, especially given some of the contracts that went out with for Shesterkin, for example, Patrick Demko. I don't view them as much better than Carter Hart, and so I think from that perspective, that was really good. I like the Cam Atkinson trade. I know Jacob Voracek is a much beloved figure for some portion of the Flyers fan base. I've never been a big fan. My data has not been a big fan either. So sort of to get off of his contract and go with a equal player, in my point of view, and Cam Atkinson for a slightly cheaper cap hit. I know there's some extra years attached to his contract, but I'm like, when Kevin Hayes is like 34 or whatever, it doesn't matter anyway. Like the team's going to be in a different state regardless. So you might as well, like, get the best bang for your buck while you can. So I think those were the good trades. I was not a fan of the Ryan Ellis trade. I think I was one of the few people that was not. And for the reasons I said, like when I looked at his data, he had a very difficult year for him. And so his data, at least on my end, all showed a very, like, not even just like a bad year for him, just like a bad year overall for any defenseman. And so you're looking at 6 years at like, 6.25 million with a player that's had an extensive injury history and really did not have a great year last year. I was like, I didn't like that. And then I also felt like Nolan Patrick never really got obviously with the injuries and all that stuff like that, he didn't get the fair shake that he should have gotten with the team. So that was a part that I was a little bit concerned about. And then, obviously the Rasmus trade. I mean, that's a big bet, not only for the player itself, who's much maligned in the analytics community for good reason, but then also to give up a first-round pick for a guy that's a rental, and then you're more than likely going to try to re-sign them. And to sort of justify that trade, you almost have to re-sign them probably at a raise from what he's making now. And that's definitely very concerning at the moment. So I have a lot of concerns about their blue line in the current period.
We all do too, a little bit. I think that having sort of one reclamation project is fine, but having multiple of them at the same time is the big concern for Flyers fans. And I think Ristolainen falls under that category. Hart certainly falls under that category to some degree. And Ellis does because, like you said, of that injury history and having a not great most recent season. So it could all go spectacularly well, or it could all crash and burn. And again, we just kind of have to wait and see. Hopefully it's somewhere on the going spectacularly end of things. Thinking about the other players on the Flyers, do you think there's anyone in particular that's been trending in the right direction and has the potential for a really strong breakout season this upcoming year?
That's a good question. I mean, that the answer to that was Travis Konecny. I know people were down on his year last year, but I still think he was actually pretty darn good by my numbers. And so I think, maybe the production wasn't there, but in terms of where his like overall potential and talent level is, especially in comparison to other players with his like profile, I can definitely see him sort of taking a step forward. The other guy I would have said was Philippe Myers. Unfortunately, they traded him. I liked a lot of stuff he was doing. So he like rates really, really well on like my shots, like metric, and because he was a bigger player and didn't necessarily play like that all the time, he sort of got held against him. So I was a little bit worried about that. I think Ivan Provorov, I've gone back and forth on him a lot, and I think I actually had a post about him a few days ago where his first couple of years were definitely on a first pairing D trajectory, like an elite one. And then he's had a sort of inconsistent couple of last years. I think people, with that being said, so I think a couple of years ago I was much lower on him than the general public, and now I think I'm much higher on him. I think there's a lot about it wasn't Matt Niskanen, was it? Who was his partner the other day? Like 2 years ago.
No, that was Matt Niskanen.
Yeah, so everybody's like, "Oh man, Matt Niskanen left," and that's why Provorov struggled. I'm like, no, I think it was more the team around him. Like we said, the context around him than Matt Niskanen, magical powers as a defensive partner. So I think they can recover that. I think he is due for a bounce back season, and I think at his cap hit, at his contract, it's probably a fair evaluation, especially given how other top pairing defensemen are getting paid. So I think they'll probably be happy with that in a couple of years. So I really expect a really good season from him. I'm a big Morgan Frost fan too, so hoping that he can sort of, stick with the like regular planes on. I just think he has a lot of skill and can unlock a lot of things for the team. But you just never know with players without a ton of experience.
Thanks again for Chris Watkins for joining the show today. We'll have part 2 of the conversation with him coming up on Friday's show. Wrapping up with our Flyers fun thing, Shane Gostisbehere and his now wife Gina got married this past weekend, and a bunch of Ghost Flyers teammates were at the wedding, and there were some good pictures of that. So I am sharing that with you. Thanks again for listening to today's show. We'll be back again Friday with, of course, our gritty thing of the week as well. As a reminder, we always want to hear from you. Send us in mailbag questions via Twitter at LockedOnFlyers or email the show at lockedonflyers@gmail.com. I'm Rachel. I'm on Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM. Thanks again for listening and have a great day. Betting on the NHL doesn't have to be a guessing game if you listen to the Locked On Bets podcast hosted by your boy Q and handicapping expert Lee Sterling. Get daily picks, blowout specials, wrong team favored picks, and Lee Sterling's lock of the day. Follow the Locked On Bets podcast brought to you by betonline.ag wherever you get your podcasts.
What's going on, Locked On Podcast listener? If you're enjoying this podcast, and why wouldn't you be, and you happen to be a Penn State fan, make sure you join me, Kevin McGuire, host of the Locked On Nittany Lions podcast. We have just gone back to 5 days a week, so we're bringing you daily Penn State coverage. This is going to be a very challenging and a very fun season for Penn State football, and of course, they've been killing it on the recruiting trail as late, so if you want to get all caught up on all things Penn State Nittany Lions, now is as good a time as any to make sure you're following the Locked On Nittany Lions podcast. We're available on the Odyssey app or wherever you're following this particular Locked On podcast. And of course, you can catch us on Twitter at Locked On Nittany. So come join me, Penn State coverage every day, Monday through Friday, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, on the Odyssey app, or wherever you get your podcast.